morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for attending this panel today with His Excellency Abdulla bin Touq Al Marri, the U.A.E. Minister of Economy, and His Excellency Dr. Thani bin Ahmed Al Zeyoudi, the U.A.E. Minister of State for Foreign Trade. Today's program is aptly named Peace and Prosperity in the Middle East because it marks the one-year anniversary of the successful signing of the Abraham Accords in Washington, D.C. This normalized relations for the first time between the U.A.E., Israel, and Bahrain. And as we celebrate, or as we come to the end of the Jewish New Year, Shana Tova to all, and we ask that our names of our Jewish friends and all be inscribed in the book ahead for the next year on the holy eve of Yom Kippur. We're so pleased to be able to celebrate this trilateral Abraham Accords with all of you here at SALT. SALT's been a leading global thought leadership conference. There was an amazing conference in Abu Dhabi in 2019 that Anthony and his team led, and they're planning and hoping to be in Abu Dhabi again in March of 2022, and we are very, very pleased to be participating in that. I'm Danny Sebright, president of the U.S. U.A.E. Business Council, and I think, as was said, we're the leading bilateral chamber of commerce and trade between the U.S. and the U.A.E. Without further ado, gentlemen, let's jump right in because we have a limited amount of time. I'd like to cover a number of topics if we could. Coming out of COVID-19, and I just came back from 2 weeks in the U.A.E., and I'm telling you, it's a very different sense and feeling. 95% of your population is vaccinated. Everyone wears a mask. I must have had 6 or 7 PCR tests while I was there in a 2-week period. You've implemented a lot of new economic reforms coming out of COVID to get the country and the region back on track in a very exciting way. Mr. Minister, could you outline some of the steps you've taken?
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, SALT and the organizers for having us here today, sitting on the panel, really speaking about the U.A.E. story. I think the major story that we're going to speak about is next month, starting the 1st of October, the Expo 2020 happening for 6 months in the U.A.E., in the Emirates of Dubai. We're here as well to really explain as well about the story that happened the last 18 months. And let me tell you, when I started my post back in July in 2020, it is the hardest post you can ever take as a Minister of Economy in the middle of a pandemic. But I think as soon as we started that, we managed to really reform and really take a step back and breathe and look at the economy as sectors and understand what was the U.A.E.'s economy pre-COVID. And the question was, what's the U.A.E.'s economy post-COVID? And COVID-19 really made a dent in the economy, not just in the U.A.E., but I think globally. And I think the economy is not going to come back to pre-COVID times in a setup where we understood that we need to really put some regulations, some policies in place to really move the economy towards a new economy, towards new sectors and areas of what we're doing. So we formulated a team in the Ministry of Economy. We reorganized, and the first thing we came out with is 100% ownership to companies in the U.A.E. In the past, foreign ownership to companies in the U.A.E. used to be 49 to the foreign owners and 51 to a local owner. And today, you can own it 100% in the United Arab Emirates. With that, gave the opportunity as well to look at other regulations, such as the residencies program, which His Excellency Dr. Thani can speak more about. But I think we looked at how can we look at the talent, and the talent is the fuel of any economy. We already understood as well that there are some ex-industries in the U.A.E. that might not be there in the future. And then we understood as well, how do we look at sustainably moving towards new economy? We found out that there's a lot of e-commerce, digital economy coming in place, fintech, agri-tech. There's a lot of sectors that really started up back in COVID times. At that as well, we looked at the FDI investments in the U.A.E. has increased by 44% in 2020. We understood as well that there's a lot of people wanted to move to the U.A.E. because how safe and secure the nation is. We had a message from our leaders back as well saying that everyone in the U.A.E. is going to be taken care of. And that message really gave a pleasant understanding that anyone who sits on the ground of the U.A.E. is going to be taken care of. So don't worry about the COVID-19. We have everything under control. So we started with a plan of $100 billion into SMEs and companies, supporting them. We had a 33 initiative plan phased out on 3 phases. We are at the moment at phase 3, looking at the future of the economy and really pushing towards that. And I think that's something which is very vital and important for us. Last week, Thani, we managed to launch the 50 by 50 projects for the next 50 years. You know that the U.A.E. is celebrating its 50 years anniversary this year by the 2nd of December. And at the 2nd of December, we are as well giving the U.A.E. and the world our 50 years vision as well. So this is something which is very important. So last week, we launched about 13 projects out of the 50. More to come today as well, and more to come next week. There's more projects coming out. So we have 50 projects lined up. And let me tell you, Thani, these projects are not announcement of we're going to start. These projects are already started. These projects are already been in plan in the kitchen for the last couple of months, and they are ready to go out at the moment. So let me tell you a couple of things we are looking at. One, which is the Investopia conference we are looking at. So the Investopia comes from the Utopia and investing in the future city as well. So this is something which we would like to bring people attention here, that U.A.E. is putting down a conference in March in the Expo 2020, trying to bring people in to invest in the future, not in the current economy. So we're looking at the future economy and trying to bring governments, funds, investors, SMEs, entrepreneurs to come together and say, what's the next big thing in the next 10 years? What's going to make us disruptive? And how can we invest in it today? And maybe announce some investments at that time as well. So this is what we are focused on. There are other as well projects that we focused on, the 10 by 10, which is the 10 sectors and 10 countries, working on with 10 governments, try to put some economical trade agreements and economical agreements to bring together
Thank you, sir. Dr. Thani, I came back from the U.A.E. last week, and I had 70-some meetings with the major American companies while I was there. They all spoke, as His Excellency said, about security and how glad they were to be operating and doing business in the U.A.E. during the time of COVID. The U.A.E., as we all know, is a regional hub, has been a regional hub. But the U.A.E., that what most Americans and foreign audiences don't know, has become a global hub. Truly has entered the stage on the global scale as a hub for the world. You are in charge. You're responsible for some of these foreign direct investment incentives and working to change some of the laws that make it more attractive for American and other companies to come set up business. Talk about that. Why should everyone in this audience be thinking about doing business in the U.A.E. today, in this new global hub?
Sure. Thank you, Thani, and thank you for the organizers for inviting us here. I want to just compliment what His Excellency Abdulla was saying, and we resumed our roles within the Ministry of Economy at the middle of the pandemic. But one of the main decisions that we took while joining the ministry, that we will not disturb anything within the country, I will not go backward. And this is one of the main messages that we always send to our business communities. The U.A.E. is stable, and whenever there is a reform within the laws or regulations, it's going to boost the economy, not going backward. One of the things which we always work to sell, why the U.A.E.? The U.A.E. is very stable as a nation, has very visionary leaders. Leadership is there. The infrastructure is one of the most state-of-the-art infrastructure within the region and globally, and the services that we provide for everyone. So what we have achieved throughout the last 1 year and 3 months, we sent the Hope mission to Mars, fulfilling our commitments. Nothing will stop us. No pandemic, no crisis will stop our plan. Second one was the connection of the first peaceful nuclear planet to the grid in the whole region, sending strong messages that sustainability and power and the continuities is the backbone of our economy. And then we started the whole reform of our regulations and the way that we manage the residencies. What we have done in the field of trade and investments, we're talking about mainly 4 main pillars. First one is the how we're going to attract more investments. For sure, the promotions and the marketing campaigns which we're starting, the engagements which we have, And thinking about the whole holistic approach, how the investors and the entrepreneurs, anyone who's visiting the UAE is going to feel that the UAE is home for them, and by encouraging and improving the ecosystem, improving the regulatory systems, by improving the company laws, which His Excellency was talking about. At the same time, how we're going to give a clear picture on the UAE's business environments to the communities. One of the initiatives which was launched last week as well as part of 50 by 50 economic initiatives as a celebration for our 50 years anniversaries is the Invest.AE platform, where we're combining all government, federal, local, private sector in one platform where they can have a clear picture on and clear visibilities on the various sectors, and then they can start opening their license and opening their accounts in 15 minutes. The fourth aspect when it comes to FDI is the direct engagements between us and the private sector, ensure that we're widening the market for them. And we want to ensure that we're not talking about the UAE market, we're not talking about the GCC, we're a global hub and we are a global investment and trade hub. The second part of the whole investment and trade is how we're going to go abroad. What are the sectors which is going to be very strategic? We would like to ensure that our companies are investing in those abroad. Now, how can we take our SMEs, the exporters, some of the small and medium companies with us outside to encourage them to expand and scale up outside the UAE? And at the same time, we are one of the highest contributor to the humanitarian work globally. And how can we ensure that the investments goes hand in hand with this development work which we're doing globally? The third element is the trade. We noticed that the trade has been declining lately, especially in the last 10 years. But at the same time, the service trades is picking up. So we have to focus on the service, and we work on very dedicated and very comprehensive service strategies. And we started targeting countries. We launched an initiative last week. We called it 10 by 10, where we're going to focus on 10 sectors, 10 countries for a certain period to ensure that we're having at least 10% growth in our exports to those countries. And at the same time, we announced 8 countries that we're going to start with them comprehensive economic partnership agreements to ensure that those investors and business people within the UAE, they will have a wider range of markets that they can cover. And we're talking about almost 4 billion populations from Far East ASEAN to Far West of Africa. And this is the population which has almost 50 to 60% young generation, which is going to have and embrace the new technologies and digitalizations of work. Last element is the talents. And the talents, human being, is the backbone, is the DNA of the whole movement moving forward. We're talking about knowledge-based economy. Knowledge-based economy is about human being and is about person. So we're not talking about the locals, we're talking about anyone who's living in the UAE. So that's why we went and revamped the whole residency system, where we added to the golden visa and the citizenship program, which was announced earlier this year.
Golden visa means I can stay for 10 years as a business person.
Absolutely. So we would like to ensure that they feel stable, they're feeling that the UAE is a home. And we start even taking all the barriers that by the direct engagement with those investors, having the children and sponsoring their children who are up to 25 years old. Anyone who wants to, who loses his job, he's not obliged to leave the country within 30 days. Now they can stay up to 60 days, so can they look for another jobs. Families who lost the main sponsor, they can stay up to 1 year. So we took even the humanitarian aspects of the system. We launched the freelancer visa for the first time in the region. So freelancers is going to be introduced, and the green visa has been introduced as well. So we can complement the whole system. So those are the 4 main pillars when it comes to trade and investments, which we're focusing on.
It's amazing. It's different and it's revolutionary from anything else that's going on in the region today. So, and it does set you up as to be a global hub for sure. You mentioned the 10 other countries that you're focused on in the year ahead. Just quickly, one of those is Israel, and we are in the anniversary of the Abraham Accords. Just a word or two about the opportunity for trilateral business investment and cooperation by friends in the audience here in that context.
Can I just start with that? Maybe Dr. Thani can add to it. I think when we had the conversation with you last year and the Israeli as well companies, we were talking about one major thing. There was a question last year that says, well, we know how you're going to benefit from Israel, but how Israel is going to benefit from you. And I said, well, Israel is a startup nation and the UAE is a scale-up nation. And 1 year later, or less than a year later, 2 months ago, His Honor Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Prime Minister and the Vice President of the UAE, tweeted about an Israeli drone company scaled up in the UAE, taking a surveillance project in Expo 2020, surveilling the security of Expo 2020. That's a real-time, Thani, of a scale-up project of what we were talking about. How can you actually look at the UAE not just as a hub, but a scale-up for the region? The UAE today is welcoming 200 nationalities, people from every part of the world to come to the UAE and look at the UAE as a gateway to scale up into MENA, into Asia, into Africa, you name it. This is something which we are putting out there. Our logistics, our infrastructure, our space is ready for the world. We are ready. We're young. We're fit to fight.
Excellent. We have some brand name companies in the room today from the UAE that are titans in the industry. Abdulla, Adio, Abu Dhabi Global Markets. We have representatives on. You brought a delegation, gentlemen, with you, Your Excellencies, of some 20-some people. We have His Excellency Mohammed Ali Al Sharafa from the Department of Economic Development in Abu Dhabi. We have Farhad Gagawi from Dubai FDI. We have Sharjah FDI. You're here on a week traveling around the United States to tell your story. You were in Washington all day yesterday and had meetings at the White House, the Department of Commerce, USTR. What's your message in these government meetings with this great delegation that you brought and with businesses that you're meeting with? What are you trying to convey?
Well, let me tell you one thing, Thani. In all these meetings we had yesterday and the day before, we were hearing the word, wow, are you doing this? Wow, you're doing that? Wow. So the story we're saying is amazing. And I think what we're trying to convey to the audience and everyone is there is a story in the last 18 months. We took the job back in July. We're working day and night to really put things into the future, thinking about the economy. We're here to make changes. We're here to look at really diversified, sustainable FDI investments. UAE has always been the US partner consecutively for the last 14 years, the number one partner of trade in the region. We want to continue that. We want to increase that. We want to put that in the map. We want to really help businesses to take forward from the UAE anywhere into MENA, into Africa, into Asia. That's what the UAE is. That's the UAE always been for the last 50 years, and we want to keep on doing that. We're here to really talk and tell our story. And it's more of a fact-finding mission as well. We want to understand what changed in the US, what's happening, what's really the new gig, what's the new technology.
You need a few months for that. So.
Trying to put it with a very condensed structure of visits. But the last 3-4 days, we learned a lot as well. And I think that's something which is very, very important. I just learned a lot about NFTs yesterday. So this is something which is really, really interesting.
Any thoughts from an FDI perspective? The story you're trying to tell here.
I want to what His Excellency was saying. We're going to promote what we have done, and we're going to open doors. We're here with the business delegation as well, not only the representatives of the governments, so we can explain the growth on those sectors which we're targeting. We're targeting those sectors which for sure are going to add value to the states as well as to the UAE and to the whole globe. And if you allow me, Thani, I would like to just give some details on some of the sectors which we're targeting. We're not targeting the conventional sectors because we know that they're going to be transformed automatically, and they've been pushed very hard by the pandemic and the crisis too, so they can move forward and make sure that they're going to continue living after the pandemic. But the sectors which we're targeting for sure, the e-commerce and the retail, we saw huge growth, we saw transformations, and this is going to be the game changer, taking the SMEs, taking the exporters with them, and in the market. Agribusiness is something which is very crucial. We saw the food security matters during the pandemic, and we saw how crucial and how important that the movements of the productions to be close to home. The third sector, which we're very pioneer in, is the health wellness sector. We're talking about almost the UAE is attracting around 70% of the whole regional health wellness businesses and our part of the world. And at the same time, the health sector in general and pharmaceutical is very huge. We've been a supplier to the whole region through the storages, through the big warehouses that we have and big factories that we have in the UAE. And we'll make sure that through our infrastructure, through our connection, through our investments abroad, we're going to have this accessibility to everyone during any futuristic crisis. Biotech, advanced science are very key. It's very linked to our manufacturing and industrial strategies. There is a huge push. We're targeting to invest around 300 billion dirhams for the upcoming 10 years in the industrial and manufacturing sector. ICT is a game changer because we saw the transformation in education and health sector and the e-commerce. So ICT is going to be embedded in most of the work which we're doing. Supply chain is going to be a key and critical challenge to everyone through the containers, through the cost of the shipments. So supply chain has to be looked at carefully, and something which is we've been managing very well during the pandemic, and we're going to ensure that we do have very strong investments in this to make sure that we're bringing the prices and not cause inflations within the country.
Before we leave the focus on the U.S., you have an amazing team here in the United States with your embassy in Washington, D.C. Obviously, Ambassador Al-Ateba leads a wonderful team. Saud Al-Nawais, your commercial counselor. You have a new consul general here in New York. You have consulates around the country. All of these folks are focused on helping Americans understand better what is the U.A.E. and what are the opportunities. So it's really important to shout them out and say a word about them. When we look at other countries in the region, obviously, and again, in my meetings over the last 2 weeks when I was there, every American company is thinking about how they triangulate between statements that are coming out of Riyadh and Saudi Arabia in dealing with competition. American companies are worried about China and competition. Healthy competition is good for everyone. There's no question about that. Say a few words about how Americans should think about their place, their business place in the region vis-a-vis other countries there, and then in the great power competition that's going on with China. There was obviously a lot said at this morning's session. I think the national security session this morning, we talked about Afghanistan for 5 minutes, and then the rest of the session was spent talking about China and the U.S., how the U.S. has to think about China for the future. So I'm just curious if you can add anything on those two issues.
Yeah, let me speak about what really I'm very expert about is trade supply chains. And I think the trade supply chains, I always think about it as a miles and millions of miles of supply chain, but they are as thick as 1 inch. So any stoppage to any supply chain, you have a problem globally. Post COVID-19 today, every country and nation is really looking inwards and trying to build manufacturing and establishing inwards kind of investments as well. But what we need to look at global issue is the globalization issue. How do we really look at the re-engineering supply chain overall? The increase in prices of container shipments today reached up $15,000. How can we look at that and address that as a major issue? I really push this kind of thinking as well with my colleagues in the U.A.E. and pushing it as well with my counterparty in the U.S. as well, speaking about let's address this kind of issues. These are problems of inflation. We're going to see them in the next months and next year. This is a challenge that will really face the world. And I think it's important to really understand how can we push the multilateral organization to really rethink and re-engineer the supply chain and trade globally. This is something of our interest, and U.A.E. can really play a big role into it. We have a very strong infrastructure in logistics, in aviation. We can really play a role as well to reduce the prices, to really move and the mobility of containers and shipments across the globe. The U.A.E. has always been a place where people meet and do business, wherever nationality you are, wherever country you come from. The U.A.E. has a lot of tolerance and a lot of ability to really talk different languages as well.
Let me add to what His Excellency as well said. When it comes to geopolitics, competition is always healthy and encouraging to move forward. And the competition within our region means that the volume of businesses and the economic growth is going to be higher, which means that our share in this pie is going to be much bigger than it used to be. So competition is always healthy, and we always encourage the competition. So speaking about the geopolitics and especially the relation between U.S. and China, we've been looking carefully on this, and there is always a winner and loser from such geopolitical tensions. I would say that some of the countries managed to win from this tensions, like Mexico, which harvest many manufacturing, which moved from China closer to the States. So we have to look at those from even positive angle. How can we bring an added value to the work and to the economic direction that we're doing? Last point, which I want to raise as well, the economy has to be always the at the front seat, not the politics. The minute that the politics is the at the front seat, it means it's going to slow down the economy. The minute that you have the economy, it's going to push the political agenda forward to the right way.
We're creating jobs, Thani, the end of the day, everywhere. So the creating jobs is the bottom line here.
So this morning, again, on the National Security Panel, every one of the experts talked about maybe the future of the U.S.-China competition. One aspect is to start moving some of the American companies, moving some of their supply chain production and content from China to other places in the region. In conversations with the U.S. government at a high level, this might be an opportunity for the U.A.E. going forward if U.S. companies really do start doing that as a result of what's going on in our big power competition, as we call it, for the future. You might be a winner in this if handled the right way, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, come to the U.A.E. already. I think one important part as well, I had a meeting with all the businesses people back in the U.A.E. One question is, I always sit down and when I sit with them is ask them, how can I improve your profitability by 10%? It's not about what challenges you. It's not about what the problem is. It's profit on the line. And business people really speak about profitability. Whatever it is, the question is to the audience as well as to everyone. How can the U.A.E. improve your profitability by 10% in the region? And that's something which really can push a lot of discussions and the challenges away.
With 1.5 billion people coming into the middle class in China, of course, the flip side is China is a huge market that the United States, no country can ignore and has to take very, very seriously. And it's very important. We have a couple minutes left. I want to talk about, you talked about everyone in the world and from the world coming to the U.A.E. I want to talk about the greatest show on earth that's going to open here on 1 October. Say a few words about Expo 2020, please, and what people are going to find there. I was out at the site last week when I was in the U.A.E., and I can't wait. This is going to be amazing.
Expo is going to be really amazing. I will say Expo was ready last year. We are more ready than last year today, and I think it's important. We are ready to receive the world. We're ready to receive people physical, face-to-face. I'm tired of the virtual calls and being behind screens. And I think it's time for really showing up and being there physically, discussing a lot, conversing on so many ideas. There's so many things to see in the Expo 2020, and I think the world is ready, the U.A.E. is ready to really host, and Dubai is a place to be in October till March. Great weather as well, so you're going to enjoy the beaches as well.
You want to add to that?
We invite everyone to see the future and the futuristic technologies. As His Excellency said, we were ready since last year because the technologies were on place in site, but we really invite everyone to come and see and how can they take these technologies, ideas, and innovative ways of running things forward and scale them up from the U.A.E. to the whole globe.
Well, Saud and I have been working on Expo for 10 years, and with Her Excellency Rima Hashemi, and I have to tell you, I just can't wait. It's going to be an amazing welcoming of the world to your country. So thank you for the hospitality that's about to come. You know, I asked you a question yesterday in Washington, and just very short. We have just a few seconds left. It's time to be positive about the future of the world coming out of this global pandemic. Tell me something positive you each say to your children about the future, and when you talk to them at night at the dinner table.
Well, my discussions, I think yesterday, I was telling you, Thani, about when I sit with my 9-year-old daughter and we all speak about the future. It's a challenge that we always try to convince a 9-year-old at least to what type of jobs they're gonna hold 10 years from now. And I think that's something which is very important. The skill set is not the skill set today is going to be there next 10 years. So trying to inspire them, trying to push that there is a lot of part for the youth to focus on. She wants to be a jewel maker, so she does a lot of jewelry and stuff. So she really designs stuff. So she wants to be that. So yeah, I'm pushing for that.
Two things. First one, they have to ensure that they are very well equipped to the quick changes that's happening on a daily basis. And the other thing, that they have to be a global citizen, as you rephrased it yesterday very well. They should not stick to the technology. They have to go and meet people in person, and they have to do the balance. And we as politicians, we have to ensure that the infrastructure is there to do this balance.
Outstanding. And someone asked me to ask the question, you do tell them about Anthony Scaramucci and SALT, right? You talk to them about Anthony all the time? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining today. Thanks our guests for joining.